Most people are surprised to learn that individual behaviors and lifestyle choices, and not medical care, are the biggest contributors to our overall health. And they are even more surprised to learn that our physical environment also contributes to our health more than medical care. Yet we spend over $2.3 trillion per year on medical care, but only about 15% of that amount on environmental protection and pollution control. Obviously, there's a disconnect between health risks and funding priorities. Perhaps we need to learn more about the importance of the environment on our health. And that's why we'll be focusing on environmental protection and pollution control on today's episode of A Public Health Journal. Please stay tuned.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal, a program that explores public health issues facing our society today and tomorrow. The host of the show is Dr. Ed Ellinger, Commissioner of Health for the state of Minnesota. A Public Health Journal is sponsored by the Minnesota Department of Health and the Hennepin County Human Services and Public Health Department, all working together towards the goal of healthy people living in healthy communities.
Welcome to A Public Health Journal. Today we're going to discuss our environment and why it's important to protect it and clean up the pollution that has already been done. We'll be looking at the impact that the environment has on our health and why environmental protection is such an important part of public health. Joining me in this discussion is Paul Aasen, Commissioner of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Paul, welcome to A Public Health Journal.
Good morning, Commissioner. I don't get a chance to say that.
I know. Well, yes, so the two commissioners here talking.
That's right.
And which will be interesting because in public health we have an environmental health area.
Absolutely.
And you're certainly engaged in environmental issues. Mm-hmm. So I want to talk a little bit about that. What's the difference between what you do in pollution control related to the environment and what the health department does related to the environment?
We all fit together like a nice puzzle. If you look at your discipline, public health, within that there's this thing called environmental health, which is where we interact with the environment and the individual health impacts of that. We start there in our world, so that's where we match with this human impact of pollution, and then we move past that out into the impact of pollution just on the environment itself. So we cover environment and people, and you cover people in the environment and elsewhere. So that's where we match up and have a direct crossover.
All right, so you try to protect the environment from the people, and we try to protect the people from the environment.
In some ways that's true, and then we've got a mission somewhere in there that says do both at the same time as you do as well.
So tell me, what is the mission of the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, Mpca, which we'll be probably using that acronym as we go along?
Our mission is to do a couple things. I mean, first of all, we're charged with working with the citizens of the state to help protect and conserve the environment that we all live in. And that takes many forms. One is we act as a delegated authority under federal law from the EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, to implement Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, the solid waste and hazardous waste laws in this state. So there's a legal existing law function we provide. We also have an obligation to study the environment, understand what's going on in the environment, where pollutants are going, how they affect the environment itself, and then the citizens, again, that are interacting with that environment.
So the responsibility is really a federal responsibility to keep the air, water, soil clean, and then they delegate it to state agencies to do the work that we really want as a nation?
That's correct. That's the base that we all come off of. Ironically, the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, if you'll notice, it's not called the Minnesota Environmental Protection Agency.
Right.
The reason it's called the Pollution Control Agency is because it was formed before the Environmental Protection Agency came into existence. The Mpca was formed and the idea gelled in the late 60s. EPA came into existence in the early 70s. So our name doesn't match, even though the mission does. So in some ways, Minnesota was on the front end again, thinking about this a little bit earlier than the federal government, and now we've married those efforts for 40 years.
So what prompted the development of the PCA, Pollution Control Agency, in the 60s? What was the impetus for this?
I think it was the same things that drove Earth Day in the early 70s. Minnesotans and their 10,000 lakes saw that things were changing, and obviously water is a driver for this state, probably always will be. All our rules and laws in this state are different because we have so much water when you compare us to other states. But people were simply concerned. And the right people were in the right places to say, we ought to start taking care of this. And it just happened that it was just a little bit earlier than the rest of the nation got to that conversation.
Right. And we talked about the fact that the federal government has a role, state government.
Yes.
How about local government and local areas? How do you relate to the local jurisdictions and what's their responsibility?
Like most public endeavors, it's a stacking system. So the federal government sets a floor, if you want to think about it that way. We have to take that floor and then act upon it. We have the ability to delegate authority, if we choose, to counties for solid waste, for feedlot inspections, for individual sewer system inspections, that kind of thing. So there's a working relationship that goes on there. The cities play an enormous role because they do most of the sewage treatment, the wastewater treatment, and we regulate that, but obviously they're the implementing partner and they're a public entity, so there's a unique relationship there. And then cities and watershed districts and lakeshore owners associations all have a play in taking care of their resource. So we have to work in and across all those layers.
So you have lots of partners in this. How do you get sort of feedback and input, and how do you collaborate with lakeshore owners and water treatment plant owners and governments?
The short answer is not well enough, quite frankly. It takes a lot of time and energy to maintain local networks. And one thing that has happened over the last 15 years is those networks haven't been maintained as well as they need to be. So we're making a big effort to do that. Some of our big projects are going to force us to do that. Cleaning up Lake Pepin, which drains an area of Minnesota that's almost the size of the Chesapeake Bay drainage, is going to require a lot of work across all those partnerships. So that will drive the whole conversation.
Yeah, all right. Now, I know one of the old saws is that the solution to pollution is dilution. And it's been used for many, but I understand that's not quite accurate. What are sort of the principles under which you work now?
There's old principles and there's new ones. There's a little bit of dilution that still goes on, in all candor. I mean, we release stuff to the environment and we make calculations about how much of it can be out there before it's an issue for public health, for environmental health, for the environment itself. That's not the best solution. The best solution is to not have that pollutant emitted in the first place. So you do have this command and control treatment mentality that's dated. There's green chemistry. There's product substitution. There's preventing pollution in the first place that is starting to play a bigger and bigger role because the simple things that you can solve the old way have largely been taken care of. So we've got new problems now.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about some of the issues. I understand that the big issues are air and water and soil, and I want to go through those. But first, we need to take a little break, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about those. We'll be back right after this message.
What's up, man? You left some leaves burning out here.
Yeah, I just came in just for a second.
Come on, man. If it's too hot to touch, it's too hot to leave. You could torch the whole neighborhood.
It's a good point there, Smokey.
9 out of 10 wildfires are caused by humans.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back. We're talking about environmental protection and pollution control in Minnesota with the Minnesota Commissioner of the Pollution Control Agency, Paul Aasen. Paul, I had mentioned, air, water, and soil. Are those the three major areas, or what are some of the, how do you categorize the areas that you work in?
Those are the areas we always have to work in. Keep the land clean, the water clean, the air clean. Our boss, the governor, has asked me, well, what are the two biggest problems? Number one is the things we burn for energy. It affects our air. Huge issue there. And then the second is we don't like to keep water on the land very long. It doesn't matter whether it's in the urban environment or the rural environment, and how we move water off the land is the other. So those are the two big issues that sit in front of us every day. Okay, well, let's talk about air. And I know you brought some slides that sort of identify with. And so we have the first slide that we're going to put on that highlights the sources of air pollutants. Maybe you could walk us through that. Absolutely. If you take a look at the slide, the dark blue pieces of the pie in the upper right side, that's really what we think of in terms of vehicle emissions. So when all of us think about, well, where does air pollution come from? Most of the time we think about cars and we think about big smokestacks. Well, if you look at the slide, the sleek piece of the pie labeled highway vehicles is us. That's us driving things, cars, trucks, delivery trucks. It's about a fifth of the pie. So it's not the biggest player. It's significant, but it's not the biggest player. We use vehicles off-road as much as we use them on-road.
What is the
Off-road would be construction.
Okay.
It would be tractors. It would be anything where we're driving around, but we're not on some pavement. And obviously, those two together then make up a huge piece of the air pollution issue. On the bottom, that kind of lighter blue, fuel combustion from electrical utilities, those are the big stacks. People think that, oh, those are the problem. Well, they're only about a tenth of our total air pollution sources, and quite frankly, they've done a lot of work. Then we burn stuff and use all kinds of other things that escape into the air, and it adds up to a big chunk of the pie, about another 40%, and it might be dry cleaning. It might be emissions from gas stations while you're fueling your car. And it's obviously just burning fuel for other purposes. Our houses burn fuel, right? I burn propane at my house to heat my house. So it's all this mix that comes together.
Right. So it does point out the fact that we have some individual responsibility. Our lifestyle choices, certainly what we drive, how far we drive, what we drive, how we heat our homes, how well we're insulated, our homes all make a difference.
It makes a huge difference. And that's where the future conversation will be. In the past, we've been able to help solve big chunks of our problems by centralizing the control of that issue. That doesn't work for you and I in our drive to work.
Okay.
Those are individual issues.
You talked about trends. So the next slide we have really points out some trends in air quality that I'd like to have us walk through. Or have you walk us through.
Happy to do that. This is one of my favorite slides because it shows both a problem and a good story all at the same time. The top blue line is the economic activity in this state from 1990 to 2008. And as you can see, we've been growing our economy in this state, and we're up 60-odd% over where we were in 1990. Immediately below it is the amount of vehicle miles traveled. This is you and I and everyone else using our vehicles. That's grown by 50% since 1990. And when you compare that to population growth, because you say, of course it's going to grow, there's more people here. There's only 18% more people in this state. So that means we are driving more than we ever did. And that is one of those drivers when you think back to that air pollution.
And so we have a few more people, but they're driving a lot more than they used to.
Definitely driving a lot more. The green line is just raw energy consumption. That's up faster than we're growing as a population. Why? How many of us have cell phones plugged in, iPads plugged in, computers plugged in, bigger TVs plugged in? It's us drawing energy out of the system, which goes back to what we burn to make our energy. The good story on this chart is the orange line. There have been tremendous reductions since the mid-90s in kind of traditional air pollutants. This has largely been due to the controls that have been put on the electrical generation utilities. So Xcel Energy, GRE, Otter Tail Power, all your power companies have been doing work, and it shows. Thank goodness, because if we didn't have that going on at the same time, we'd have a much bigger issue.
All right, so we've got increasing energy use, more miles driven, and yet the pollutants in the air are going down.
For the traditional ones, there are still some that we're worried about, and things like ozone come up, things like fine particulates. This is fine dust that's in the air, and you know from your public health background that fine dust is arguably a lot more dangerous than coarse dust because our lungs don't filter it well.
Yeah, we have a lot of asthma issues that go along with air pollution.
Oh, absolutely. And you know, the interesting thing, EPA has done a nice job in the recent past of explaining why they want to start looking at small particulates from diesel emissions or ozone. And they've been putting out some metrics on public health measures, and one of them is asthma attacks. They believe that in 2010 alone, the current Clean Air Act amendments have prevented almost 2 million asthma attacks. That's extraordinary.
Well, that's why environmental protection and environmental pollution control is a real public health issue.
They marry.
Yeah.
They marry. And it's always, it's false to think they're separated at all. It's us and the environment.
Right.
All
Now, you
together.
brought one other slide related
Yes.
to air that this one I really have to have you go through because I'm not sure that I understand it. So
Absolutely.
walk us through these kind of maps that you've got.
This is something that the Pollution Control Agency has been working on. It's a way to target what we're worried about. And your agency does similar things. And the goal for us, I think, over the next few years is to marry our ability to look ahead and try to work. This is an example of mapping of fine particulate emissions across the metro area. So if you look really close at the map, you can kind of see the outline of our freeways, just to to center you. Well, starting in the upper left, that's a map of the contribution of point sources, big smokestacks, to this fine dust problem.
The things that we always think about in terms of pollution, the big power plants.
That's right, the things we point at and say, you ought to fix that. Well, this chart would suggest that they've been largely taken out of the picture. You're not seeing orange and yellow and even green, coloring on that map because we're not seeing emissions from those sources. So you end up with on-road in the bottom right, back to our cars and vehicles that we're driving on pavement. The non-road on the bottom left, which is diesel tractors and caterpillars and road graders and all those things.
And the orange means more pollution.
Yes, that's right. The orange means there's more pollution. So as you get closer to the metro core, you can see more non-road emissions. And ironically, in the metro core, it's often from the diesel engines that drive backup generators on big buildings. So we're back to our power issue again. And then area sources, the upper right, which shows the most orange and yellow, those are aggregations of strip malls and dry cleaners and gas stations. It's all that other stuff that contributes to air pollution. And obviously that's the one that is the biggest contributor.
So how are you using maps like this?
This is getting used in a couple ways. One is we tend to find the same pollutants popping up as we look at these maps in different ways. Really fine particles are one of the issues that are out there. Dioxin, an old problem, a cancer-causing agent that usually comes from the burning of plastic, continues to show up. So we've got concerns. We use it to help find those chemicals of concern, and then we've got to work together, your agency, my agency, other folks, on trying to figure out, okay, how can we manage that? The other thing that this is going to get used for is down the road, next probably 2 to 3 years out, there's a chance the metro area will no longer be meeting air quality standards, and we'll have to go to work to try to bring it back into the standard. Well, the question becomes, where do you start the work? This helps us figure out that area sources for fine particulates are where we're going to have to focus our energy.
Okay. Now, I want to talk about some of the specific, issues, but I also want to spend a little bit of time on the water. You said
Sure.
that's, the other big issue. Tell me a little bit about the fact that you had said that we try to get the water off the land, and why is that an issue?
Right.
And how do we do that?
It comes in two major forms. One is if for those people who live in the urban areas, the issue tends to be, let's get this water off our streets. Let's have a place for water to go when it lands on the roofs of our homes or the roofs of our buildings. And that has led to this development of these massive storm sewer infrastructures underneath our cities. So the sole purpose of storm sewers is to keep our streets from getting flooded. Well, that also means that water isn't infiltrating through the soil, and it leaves the area really fast. Water naturally doesn't leave a piece of ground rapidly. It sure runs off my driveway and into that storm sewer in a hurry. So that's a problem in and of itself.
So it doesn't have a chance to percolate through the soil and have the soil collect some of the, clean the issue.
Literally clean it. And when you add to that the fact that we have all these vehicles that run on all these roads, it also tends to wash off all kinds of chemicals that get left behind. It includes metals, it includes petrochemicals, so you kind of have a double hit. A lot of water too fast, and then it's washing things into a stream that wouldn't normally be there. That's the urban core. On the rural areas, if you're working in a field as a farmer, you'd like it to dry faster in the spring or after a heavy rain. Well, we've put in series of drainage ditches or tiling systems over time, and this includes drainage ditches for our road systems in the rural areas. All of these things contribute to moving water faster than it used to. And there's, again, a twofold impact. It can wash soil off the land. That's not good for the water that ends up in. It also can be more water too fast, which is also a problem.
Yeah, and that's where you're seeing sort of the Lake Pepin kinds of things from a lot of the agricultural runoff?
Absolutely. Every day, water enters the north end of Lake Pepin and starts to slow down, and the solid material, the dirt and sand and soil that's carried in that water, starts to fall to the bottom of Lake Pepin. Lake Pepin should be taking about 3,000 years to fill up with soil. That's a natural process in a water body. It's going at a rate where in about 300 years it'll be full.
Okay. Well, I want to talk about some specific issues in the last part of our program, but we need to take another little break. Thanks. We'll be back right after this message.
Lead paint poisoning affects over 1 million children today. Dust from lead-based paint could cause violent behavior. If your home was built before 1978, log on to leadfreekids.org.
Welcome back. We're talking about environmental protection and pollution control in Minnesota with Paul Aasen, the Commissioner of the Minnesota Department of Pollution, or the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I'm so used to saying Minnesota Department of Health.
I understand. We should rename ourselves.
That's right. Well, maybe not. But we've got just a few minutes, and I know there are lots of emerging issues that I just want to kind of go through quickly. And one of that really comes, that I get a lot, is what do I do with old medicines that I have? Should I flush them down the toilet? And your discussion about moving water is relevant to that.
Absolutely. There's a couple layers to that. I mean, obviously, there's this whole field of science that's growing now about endocrine disruptors, and it's really been driven by the realization that medicines, drugs that we take and that are part of our food chain and are part of our daily process are ending up in our lakes, rivers, and streams, and that could be very well having an effect on the aquatic life that lives there. It could be very well affecting us if we draw drinking water from there. So flushing, medicine down the toilet, it's probably better than leaving it in your medicine cabinet. However, environmentally, it's not that great an idea. So your department and our department have worked with law enforcement on drug take-back days. They're doing it to get illegal drugs off the street. We're doing it to get environmentally active drugs off the street.
And then what do you do? You burn it?
They end up getting burned. And the key is burning it hot enough that it actually destroys those compounds.
Okay. Speaking of burning, what about burn barrels?
Oh, my favorite. About 250,000 of households in the state of Minnesota still burn garbage. They're spread out all over the state.
Is that legal?
There are agricultural exemptions for burning. The rest of it is illegal, so you're not supposed to be burning household garbage. We're seeing dioxins on our screening tools. We talked about that a moment ago. We believe those dioxins are coming largely from people burning garbage.
So what are you doing to try to decrease that?
We are working with anyone who will listen to us to try to, get the word out that when you're burning plastic in your backyard, you are affecting the air in your backyard. And the second is we've got to get back to work on the recycling issue.
Okay. And what about feedlots? Huge issue that we hear about in this state, a good agricultural state.
Right. Feedlots, there have been a lot of work done in the 90s on feedlots. A lot of that good work has continued. A lot of the feedlots are getting much larger. Maybe a disadvantage for some in the agricultural community to see things centralized. But from an environmental control standpoint, they have the ability then to manage in a more centralized fashion their impact. So feedlots have kind of reached a point where largely they're in balance. There's always a few issues with a few, just like there are with any other endeavor. But on the whole, that universe is pretty stable.
All right. And then toxic waste sites. And we get in the news because of the Viking Stadium.
Absolutely.
And, why can't we just build something on top of it?
Well, in some cases you can. In most cases you have to be very careful because it comes back to the public health side of the equation. Who's going to be there, how long, and what will they be exposed to? And TCF Bank Stadium is built on a reclaimed brownfield. The Target Field is built on a reclaimed brownfield. There are all kinds of activities going on to reclaim this land so we can develop it. But it does take time and it takes money to make sure that there's not any hidden surprises underneath the ground.
All right. Well, Paul, this has been quite informative for me, and I've been working in the field a little bit, and I hope it is for our audience, and there's a lot more to cover, so I'll have to have you come back again to
I'd love to.
It's
always a pleasure to chat.
Great. It's been great having you here. And I'll be back with a closing comment right after this message.
When you throw away money on wasted electricity, you're throwing away everything you could have bought with it. Saving energy saves you money. Learn more at energysavers.gov.
In our high-tech medical care system, we often believe that the most complex and difficult problems can be eliminated only by complex, difficult, and high-tech interventions. Most of us have a hard time imagining how we could possibly contribute anything to solving the health problems that face us. Well, let me tell you about a simple environmental health intervention that helped change history. In 1854, cholera deaths in a part of London were rising rapidly and the city was in panic. John Snow, a physician in the area, investigated the outbreak and found that the people dying from cholera had one thing in common. They all drank from the pump that was located on Broad Street. Armed with this information, John Snow went to the local authorities and recommended that the pump handle be removed from the Broad Street pump. As soon as it was removed, the number of cases began to diminish and eventually disappear. John Snow didn't know that the disease was caused by an infectious agent. He didn't have any high-tech medicine to treat the disease. He didn't have a vaccine to prevent its spread. All he had was information about the most common activities of the people in the area and an inquiring mind that could make connections about what was happening in his community. His common sense approach to problem solving and his simple intervention of removing a pump handle stopped an epidemic and earned him the title of Father of Epidemiology. Do you ever wonder if there are problems today that could be resolved with an intervention as simple as removing a pump handle? I certainly do, and I think there are many. So to help make this world a healthier place, and in honor of John Snow, let's see if we can find them. That's all for today. Thanks for watching. I hope you can join us again next time on a Public Health Journal.
Lead paint poisoning affects over 1 million children today. Dust from lead-based paint could cause violent behavior. If your home was built before 1978, log on to leadfreekids.org.